Hello, survivors. Thanks for tuning in. Your support keeps this story alive. Don't forget to subscribe and join our growing survivor community. Drop your city in the comments, and let's begin the story.
The morning sky over New York was painted in gold and pride. After months of campaign chaos, corruption scandals, and public unrest, Johran Mmdani stood on the steps of City Hall, the youngest and most hopeful mayor the city had seen in decades. Reporters shouted his name, crowds cheered, and drones buzzed overhead, streaming his speech live to millions. He looked every inch the leader people had dreamed of, calm, focused, and burning with purpose. But beneath that calm, a strange unease brewed. His phone had buzzed 3 times before the ceremony began, all from Dr. Selena Ortiz, head of the city's Emergency Medical Response Unit. He ignored the calls. Today was supposed to be about hope, not emergencies. When Johran finally raised his hand to begin, the roar of the crowd faded into an ocean of silence. He began speaking about unity, rebuilding trust, and reclaiming New York's humanity after years of decay. The people cheered again. His voice carried over the plaza like a promise. Then, far away, a scream pierced the air. At first, no one noticed. It was drowned beneath the noise of clapping and camera shutters. But then came another scream, and another. A chain reaction of terror rippled from the edges of the crowd toward the podium. A woman stumbled into view, her clothes torn, her arms slick with blood. She fell to her knees in front of the barricade, trembling, her voice rasping something that sounded like, "They're coming." Before the nearest officer could reach her, she'd lunged, teeth sinking into his neck. The world cracked open in that instant. Johran froze. Chaos exploded before him. People screamed, running in every direction. Police drew their weapons, but confusion paralyzed them. On the jumbo screen behind Johran, the live feed flickered, showing panic, blood, and shadows moving faster than humanly possible. An officer grabbed the mayor by the arm, shouting, "Sir, we have to go." But Johran stood rooted to the marble steps, staring at the impossible sight below, citizens tearing at each other, their eyes empty and feral, their mouths dripping red. He whispered, "What is happening?" The officer didn't answer. He dragged Johran toward the security convoy. Helicopters thundered overhead. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of gunfire cracked like fireworks. They sped away through the streets, sirens wailing. The city, moments ago alive with celebration, now drowned in chaos. Pedestrians ran blindly through intersections. Cars crashed into storefronts. Someone banged on the mayor's vehicle window, screaming for help, but was dragged away by a blur of bodies before anyone could react. Inside the armored car, Johran's mind raced. He replayed the image of that woman in the crowd, the way she moved, the way her eyes had rolled back white. He turned to his aide. "Get me Dr. Ortiz." When her voice came through the radio, it was raw and strained. "Mayor Mamdani, thank God. We're losing control. It's not rabies. It's not drugs. It's something new. The infected are attacking anyone they see. We think it started in the Bronx near the morgue." "How many cases?" A long pause. Then hundreds, maybe thousands. "It's spreading through bites. The hospitals are full. We're trying to contain it, but..." The radio cut to static. The convoy turned a corner onto Broadway and froze. The street ahead was a war zone. Burning taxis, shattered glass, bodies sprawled on the asphalt. Johran saw a mother clutching her child, hiding behind a car. Then, without warning, someone pounced on them, a man with blood on his face and madness in his movements. The officer beside the mayor raised his gun. "Sir, get down!" The bullet cracked the window. The man fell, but the mother was already gone. Johran felt his chest tighten. He wanted to vomit. His aide whispered, "We need to evacuate the city." But Johran shook his head. "We can't. If we seal the bridges, we trap millions inside. Sir, if we don't, it'll spread beyond New York." The convoy reached City Hall's underground shelter. Soldiers were already stationed there, faces pale, uniforms stained with sweat. A few were trembling, the kind of fear that doesn't come from battle, but from something unnatural.
Johran walked into the control room. The power flickered. Emergency lights glowed red. Screens showed chaos across every borough. The Bronx swallowed in smoke. Manhattan gridlocked. Brooklyn in flames. A general turned to him. "Mr. Mayor, the president has ordered martial law in the city. No one in, no one out. We're locking New York down." Johran stared at the screens. The weight of leadership, once symbolic, now felt crushingly real. The city he'd sworn to save was falling apart before his first day had even ended. He asked softly, "Do we know what caused it?" The general said, "Some kind of viral mutation, but it doesn't behave like anything we've seen. They die and come back, and once they do, they don't stop." The mayor's hand trembled. He clenched it into a fist. "Then we stop them." But deep inside, he knew there was no stopping this. Not yet. Not without losing everything. Hours later, as night fell over Manhattan, the city lights flickered and went dark, one district at a time. The skyline that had once glowed with human triumph now became a graveyard of shadows. In the dim bunker, Johran sat alone for a moment, staring at the emergency radio. His mind echoed with the words he'd spoken earlier that morning. "New York is reborn today." Now it seemed like prophecy twisted into irony. The first day of his leadership had become the first day of the city's death. Outside, sirens wailed like dying breaths, and from the distance, the faint, unholy sound of growling rose through the night. The apocalypse had begun, and Johran Mmdani was no longer just a mayor. He was the last hope of a city, already half-eaten by its own fear.
The city that had once pulsed with life now screamed in terror. Sirens blared from every corner, mixing with gunshots, screams, and the guttural growls of those who no longer counted as human. Mayor Johran Mmdani gripped the edge of the table in the City Hall underground bunker, his knuckles white, as he watched chaos unfold on multiple screens. Every borough was a battlefield. Streets he had walked as a child were now rivers of blood and fire. "Sir, the Bronx is overrun," a lieutenant shouted, pointing to a map projected on the wall. "The infection is spreading faster than we can respond. Our barricades won't hold." Johran's stomach twisted. He had known this day might come, but he had not imagined this speed, this utter collapse. His hands clenched into fists. "Then we do the only thing we can, lock the city down. Bridges, tunnels, subways, everything. Contain it before it spreads further." The officer hesitated. "With all due respect, sir, people are trapped. Thousands, maybe millions inside these zones. If we seal them, they'll die." Johran's voice cut through the tension, sharp and unwavering. "Then we save who we can. We protect the rest. Now act." The military response was swift, almost brutal. Bridges to New Jersey were raised, Manhattan tunnels blocked with armored vehicles, and checkpoints set along every exit. Helicopters patrolled the skies, their spotlights cutting through the smoke and darkness that now clung to every building. Yet even as these defenses went up, the infection did not wait. Reports streamed in. A high-rise in Midtown had been breached by the infected. Subway lines in Queens were abandoned as trains rammed into crowds. Police stations were overrun as officers were bitten and turned against their own. The city's skeleton trembled as the outbreak moved like wildfire, unstoppable, indifferent. Johran and his team moved through the bunker, coordinating evacuation and rescue efforts. Dr. Selena Ortiz appeared on a monitor, her face pale and eyes haunted. "Mayor, we need to act now. The virus isn't just airborne, it's smart. It seems to recognize prey, coordinates attacks, moves faster than a normal human. If we don't contain this within 24 hours, the whole city will be lost." Johran rubbed his temples, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility. He and his team moved through the bunker, coordinating evacuation and rescue efforts. Dr. Selena Ortiz appeared on a monitor, her face pale and eyes haunted. "Mayor, we need to act now. The virus isn't just airborne, it's smart. It seems to recognize prey, coordinates attacks, moves faster than a normal human. If we don't contain this within 24 hours, the whole city will be lost." Johran rubbed his temples, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility. He studied the grim faces of his advisors, then made a decisive gesture. "Then we split forces, military here, medical units there. I'll lead a rescue team into the Bronx personally. We can't wait for containment. People are dying as we sit here." A hush fell over the room. No one questioned him. They simply nodded, sensing that the city's survival depended on this decision.
By the time the convoy reached the Bronx, twilight had fallen. The streets were unrecognizable. Cars lay overturned, their engines smoking. Storefronts were shattered. Fires consumed apartment buildings, flickering shadows of death across graffiti-stained walls. And from the alleys, the first of the infected emerged. They didn't stumble blindly. They ran. They attacked with purpose. Their eyes were white, empty, yet focused. Every movement was horrifyingly precise. Johran's heart hammered. He aimed his rifle, fired, and watched the creatures collapse, only to rise again, unaffected. "God help us," he muttered. The convoy moved quickly, soldiers clearing the streets with precision, but the infected were relentless. They swarmed from rooftops, from underground tunnels, from broken doorways. Screams erupted from every building as citizens ran, tripping over debris, dragged into the chaos. Johran shouted orders, trying to maintain some semblance of control, but the city's roar drowned his voice. Every corner brought new horrors: a child wailing while a father transformed into a monster, a family trapped in a car as the infected clogged through the windshield. The Bronx operation led Johran and a small rescue unit to the subway tunnels. They were supposed to retrieve a group of trapped civilians and scientists who might hold the key to understanding the infection. But the moment they entered the darkness, the chaos intensified. The tunnels echoed with dripping water and faint growls, shadows darting in the periphery. Soldiers moved in formation, flashlights cutting arcs through the black. Every step carried the possibility of a surprise attack. Then it happened. The first screeching infected emerged from the darkness, swarming the group. Soldiers fired point blank, but more kept coming, relentless. The tunnel walls seemed to close in, amplifying the panic. Johran lunged forward to pull a civilian to safety, narrowly avoiding a lunge from a grotesque figure. Blood spattered his face. The smell, iron and rot, burned his nostrils. He shouted for retreat,
but the tunnel was already a bottleneck of terror. One of the civilians, a young woman, screamed as the infected broke through the rear. Johran grabbed her arm, pulling her toward an emergency exit, only to find it blocked by another wave of creatures. He realized with a sickening dread there was no easy escape. As the night wore on, trust fractured within the team. A soldier bitten early in the chaos had hidden his injury, claiming he was fine. Johran discovered him just as he staggered toward the civilians, eyes cloudy and movements jerky. There was no time for hesitation. Johran raised his weapon and with a shaking hand ended the threat. The team fell silent, staring at the motionless body. This is what it's come to?" whispered a soldier. "Killing our own to save the rest?" Johran's jaw tightened. Leadership isn't easy. Right now, survival demands decisions you may never forgive yourself for. Every word felt heavy with truth. Every step forward was a moral battlefield. The infected were not just monsters. They were a mirror, reflecting humanity's fragility in the face of chaos.
By midnight, the Bronx operation had reached critical mass. Fires consumed blocks, spreading smoke and heat, forcing civilians and infected alike out into the streets. Johran coordinated air support, but visibility was minimal. Soldiers fired blindly, and the cries of the trapped echoed above the inferno. In the middle of a street, Johran found a small group of children huddled in a burnt-out playground. Their faces were smeared with ash and tears. One little boy clutched a tattered teddy bear, eyes wide in disbelief. "Mayor Mmdani, will they come back?" he whispered. Johran swallowed hard. "No one knows yet, but I promise we're going to get you out of here." He picked up the children and led them through a back alley, soldiers covering their retreat. Behind them, the fires consumed everything, turning buildings into pillars of flame and shadow. By 2 a.m., Johran and his team reached the core of the outbreak, an abandoned research facility near the river. Inside, the infection had originated, though how, no one yet knew. The smell was unbearable, chemicals mixed with blood and decay. Graffiti marked the walls, warnings and desperate messages scrawled by those who had tried to escape. Johran surveyed the scene. There were charts, vials, broken equipment, signs of a scientific endeavor gone horribly wrong. Then a figure lunged from the shadows. Johran fired. The infected fell, but he realized with horror this was only the beginning. "Selena, do you see this?" he asked into his calm. "It's a lab. This wasn't natural." Her voice trembled. "We suspected it. Some experiment, some mutation, but no one thought it could spread like this. It's intelligent." Johran's mind raced. This was no ordinary outbreak. The chaos outside, the swarming infected, the city falling apart, it was all just the surface. Something worse was coming. By dawn, the city was sealed. Military checkpoints lined the bridges and tunnels. Helicopters patrolled the skyline, searching for survivors. Fires smoldered in every borough. Smoke rose like a black shroud over New York. Johran stood on a rooftop overlooking the river, the weight of leadership pressing on him. His city was trapped, burning, screaming, and dying. But in the distance, he could see small clusters of survivors, people still fighting, still clinging to life. He clenched his fists. "We survive," he whispered. "No matter what it takes, we fight. We endure. We do not surrender." Yet even as he spoke, he knew the truth. The city had changed forever. The infection was not just a threat to life, it was a test of humanity itself. And the lockdown, meant to contain the chaos, had only turned New York into a cage for the living and the dead. The first full night of the lockdown ended with sirens fading into the distance, the occasional scream piercing the silence, and Johran Mmdani staring down the dawn of a city in flames. This was only the beginning. The city's skyline, once a beacon of life and ambition, now lay fractured, shrouded in smoke and ash. Fires still raged in Midtown, and the distant moans of the infected echoed through abandoned streets. New York had become a trap, a cage filled with chaos, fear, and death. Mayor Johran Mmdani emerged from the underground bunker at dawn, his face gaunt, his suit torn and stained with ash. His team had worked through the night, coordinating military checkpoints and trying to evacuate civilians, but the scale of the outbreak was overwhelming. Every street, every tunnel, every alley seemed to hold the threat of immediate death. Johran walked through the remnants of City Hall, past shattered windows and burned offices. Papers fluttered in the wind like desperate ghosts, and the smell of smoke and decay hung heavy in the air. The reality of leadership hit him again. He wasn't just managing chaos, he was the last line of hope in a city teetering on the edge of collapse. The first thing Johran had to do was get a message out. The communications network had been crippled by the outbreak. Most radio stations and television networks were abandoned, their operators either evacuated or killed. But City Hall still had a small old broadcast studio in the basement. It wasn't much, but it could reach enough survivors to coordinate evacuation and provide a semblance of hope. Dr. Selena Ortiz, appearing on a cracked monitor, looked up from her workstation. Her eyes were bloodshot, her lab coat torn. "Mayor, we have only one chance. Broadcast now or the city will fall into panic, and the infected, they'll learn, adapt, and spread faster." Johran nodded, gripping the edge of the table. "Then let's do it. Prepare the studio. I'll speak to the people." As technicians worked, Johran reviewed the notes Selena had sent him. Infection patterns, hot zones, survival instructions. None of it offered guarantees. Every detail revealed just how fragile life had become in the city. Johran entered the broadcast studio cautiously. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting an eerie glow on the equipment. Microphones and cameras lined the room, some broken, wires exposed like open veins. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Behind the cameras, a handful of technicians worked frantically, patching together signals and generators. Every sound outside, distant screams, gunfire, the occasional metallic crash, reminded them that time was running out. Johran sat at the desk, straightened his tie, and looked into the lens. For a brief moment, he let himself remember what it had felt like to speak to a hopeful crowd before the outbreak had stolen everything. Then he spoke.
"New Yorkers," his voice carried a quiet authority, though the tremor in his hands betrayed his nerves. "My name is Zohran Mmdani. I am your mayor. I am speaking to you now because our city, our home, is under attack. Not by an enemy we can see, not by forces we can fight with conventional weapons, but by a sickness, a plague that moves faster than we can comprehend." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Outside, a building across the street collapsed with a deafening roar. Dust filled the studio, coating his face, but he didn't flinch. We have activated a city-wide lockdown. Bridges, tunnels, and subways are secured. Military forces are in position. These measures are not to punish you, but to save lives. If you are trapped in a building, stay calm, barricade yourself, find food and water, move only when it is safe. Our goal is survival. For every one of you who can fight, who can hold on, we will find a way to get you out. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. Do not give in to fear. Fear will kill faster than the infected. If you see someone fall, help if you can, but protect yourself. We are all responsible for one another. New York has survived wars, disasters, and tragedies. We will survive this too. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the generator. Zohran's words, though measured, carried a weight that no one could ignore. Suddenly, the studio doors rattled. A distant growl echoed through the halls of City Hall. The technicians froze. Zohran's gaze shifted to the doorway. The infected were coming. The first one broke through a cracked side door, a figure half-eaten, covered in blood, eyes blank and white. It lunged at the nearest technician. Zohran reacted instantly, grabbing a fire extinguisher and smashing it into its skull. The body crumbled, twitching violently. More followed, drawn by the noise. The studio erupted into chaos. Technicians screamed, tripping over cables, knocking over cameras. Zohran moved with precision, striking with anything at hand, a chair, a microphone stand, even his own fists. Each hit was a gamble. The infected were fast, relentless, and infinitely more dangerous than humans had ever imagined. One of the technicians, a young man named Carter, fell to the floor as an infected lunged at him. Zohran didn't hesitate. He kicked the creature away and grabbed Carter, dragging him behind the control desk. The man coughed, shaking with terror. "We're going to die," he whispered. "Not today," Zohran snapped, his voice iron hard. "We survive. That's all that matters."
Johran knew they couldn't hold the studio for long. The building itself was old, poorly fortified, and the infected were only increasing in number. He made a decision. The broadcast had been sent, the message out. It was time to move. He led the technicians through the back corridors, relying on maps and memory to avoid blocked exits. Every step was a gamble. A sudden noise could signal death, and every shadow could hide a predator. In one narrow hallway, an entire group of infected had cornered them. Johran kicked over a metal cart, creating a makeshift barricade. He grabbed a heavy pipe and fought his way through, each swing precise, each strike a fight for survival. Blood sprayed across the walls, mingling with sweat and dust. They finally reached the emergency exit, leading to the streets above. The city was unrecognizable. Fires burned uncontrollably. Cars were overturned. Bodies littered the streets. The distant sound of helicopters mixed with gunfire and screams, creating a symphony of chaos that threatened to overwhelm anyone's sanity. Johran led the group through back alleys, avoiding the main roads. Each turn revealed new horrors. Families trapped in burning cars, lone survivors being attacked by swarms of infected, the infected themselves moving with terrifying coordination. At one point, a young girl clung to his arm, tears streaking her soot-covered face. "Mister, please, save them." Johran felt a pang of guilt. He wanted to save everyone,
but he knew it was impossible. He whispered, "We save who we can. That's all we can do." Hours passed. The group moved quietly, avoiding large concentrations of infected, scavenging for food and water. Johran's mind raced with plans. They needed a central safe zone, a place where survivors could gather without fear of immediate attack. By dawn, they reached a partially fortified warehouse. Johran inspected it carefully. The walls were thick, doors barricaded, and it had limited entry points, a defensible position. He turned to the group. "This is temporary, but here we survive today. Tomorrow we find more survivors, and together we fight back." The group collapsed inside, exhausted but alive. Johran sat against a wall, his body aching, his mind racing. He replayed the events of the last 24 hours, the broadcast, the chaos, the fire, the screams. He realized something terrifying. The outbreak wasn't slowing. If anything, it was learning, adapting, evolving.
Dr. Selena Ortiz arrived at the warehouse via a secure route. She carried a laptop, charts, and data she had collected from the city's monitoring systems. Her face was pale, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness. "Zohran," she said, her voice trembling, "the infection isn't just spreading, it's adapting. The bites, the attacks, it's learning how humans behave. When we try to trap it, it finds another way. This isn't just a virus. It's something new, something intelligent." Zohran stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him like a stone. "Then this fight isn't just survival. It's war, and the city is the battlefield." Outside, the wind carried the sounds of New York in ruin, distant sirens, collapsing buildings, and the faint, unholy growls of the infected. Inside the warehouse, the survivors huddled together, clinging to the mayor's resolve, their last thread of hope. Zohran looked at them, then at Selena. "We broadcast the truth today. We told people they weren't alone. But tomorrow, we fight, and we take back what's ours." He clenched his fists, staring at the horizon through the broken windows. The city was alive with death. But as long as he breathed, as long as he led, there was a chance. And in New York, a chance was all anyone had. The city above was burning. Smoke and ash choked the air, mingling with the distant wail of sirens and the guttural cries of the infected. From the warehouse where Mayor Johran Mmdani and the survivors had taken temporary refuge, the streets were a nightmare of fire, blood, and chaos. Every moment above ground was a death sentence, yet there was no way forward without descending into the bowels of New York, the subway. Johran stood before the survivors in the dim light of the warehouse, his face pale but resolute. The group numbered about 20, a mix of soldiers, civilians, and technicians. Some were injured, some trembling with fear, all exhausted from the chaos that had engulfed the city. "We have no choice," Johran said, his voice steady, commanding. "We need supplies, medical kits, and communication equipment from the subway depots. If we don't secure them, people above ground will die before nightfall. We go down. We survive, or New York dies." Dr. Selena Ortiz spoke up, her tone sharp with urgency. "Mayor, the subway is not just dark and dangerous. The infected have adapted to it. They move in packs. They use the tunnels. It's worse than the streets." Johran nodded, grim. "Then we move smart, fast, quiet, and together." The group approached an abandoned subway entrance in the East Bronx. The stairwell was littered with debris, broken signs, overturned trash cans, and the occasional skeletal hand of someone who hadn't made it. Johran led the way, gripping a crowbar tightly.
Soldiers flanked the survivors, rifles at the ready, scanning every shadow. The smell hit first, a thick, putrid stench of decay and rot, unlike anything Johran had ever experienced. It clung to the tunnels like a living thing, making eyes water and stomachs churn. Then came the sounds, distant shuffling, a faint metallic scraping, and occasionally a guttural moan that froze the blood in everyone's veins. The subway tunnels stretched before them like a dark artery beneath the city. Dim emergency lights flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows. Johran signaled the group to move silently. Every step echoed off the concrete walls, each footfall a potential warning to whatever lurked in the darkness.
Halfway down the tunnel, a sound like metal clanging echoed through the halls. Soldiers froze, weapons raised. From the darkness emerged the first wave, 3 infected, pale, gaunt, moving faster than humanly possible. Their jaws snapped, their eyes glinting with hunger. Johran acted without hesitation. He swung the crowbar, smashing one across the skull, feeling it crumble beneath the force. Bullets rang out as soldiers fired point blank, the echoing gunfire bouncing off tunnel walls. The infected fell, twitching violently, then rose again, faster, more aggressive than before. "Keep moving!" Johran shouted. "Don't stop!" The group pressed forward, adrenaline pumping, hearts hammering in the oppressive darkness. Every corner held the threat of death. Every shadow could hide another wave. The tunnels became a labyrinth of terror, each step bringing them closer to the supplies, but also closer to annihilation. The group had nearly reached the supply depot when the walls seemed to close in. A low, coordinated growl echoed from both sides of the tunnel. Johran raised his hand, an instinctive warning. And then they came. A pack of at least 20 infected, moving with uncanny coordination, poured from the side passages. They were faster than anything they had faced before, attacking in unison, flanking the group. Soldiers opened fire, but the confined space turned the firefight into chaos. Muzzles flared, ricochets pinged off concrete, and the smell of gunpowder mingled with the stench of rot. Screams rang out as a soldier was torn down by 2 infected at once. Johran swung the crowbar, striking another, then another. Blood splattered across his face. The sound of metal and bone colliding filled the tunnel. He grabbed a civilian and shoved her behind a concrete pillar, firing his weapon at anything that moved. "Fall back!" he shouted. "Fall back to the junction!" The survivors scrambled, retreating as the infected pursued. One of the soldiers tripped, screaming as he was dragged into the darkness. Johran didn't stop. He ran, striking, pushing, firing. The tunnel became a cacophony of terror, each step a gamble against death. In the chaos, a distant rumble grew louder. Johran's instinct screamed at him. The tunnels were unstable. A section of ceiling collapsed, sending concrete slabs crashing down. Dust filled the air, choking the survivors. Screams erupted as several were buried under debris. Johran pulled a trapped soldier free, bloodied and coughing. "Move! Now!" he barked. They fought through the collapse, debris cutting their skin, bruising their bodies, adrenaline overriding pain. When the dust settled, the group had lost several members. The survivors huddled together, shaken but alive. Johran scanned the tunnels. More growls echoed in the distance. They were far from safe.
After what felt like hours, they reached the supply depot. The doors were barricaded, but Zohran and the soldiers forced them open. Inside, shelves were overturned, boxes ripped apart. But there was enough: medical kits, bottled water, canned food, and radios. Dr. Ortiz immediately went to work, checking supplies, organizing medical kits, and stabilizing the injured. Zohran stood guard, listening to the tunnels. Every sound was a threat, every shadow a potential attack. Then, through the comms, a new report came in. Other city checkpoints had been breached. Infected were moving en masse through the subway lines, heading toward Manhattan. The city was collapsing from below as well as above. Zohran realized the terrifying truth. They were not just surviving, they were in the epicenter of a living nightmare that had no end in sight. Zohran made a decision. They couldn't stay in the depot. The tunnels were a death trap. He organized the group, marking a path through the subway lines toward a safer junction. The escape would be perilous. They would have to cross open tracks, bypass collapsing sections, and fight through packs of infected. The journey was a test of endurance. Every step brought exhaustion. Every turn brought terror. At one point, Zohran had to lift a fallen beam off a trapped survivor while fighting off a group of infected with his crowbar. Blood, sweat, and grime covered him, but he refused to stop. Civilians clung to him, drawing strength from his resolve. Soldiers followed orders with grim determination, realizing that their survival depended on unity and discipline. They reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. Zohran paused, surveying the area. From the far tunnel, a pack of infected emerged, more than 50, moving in unnerving coordination. He realized there was only one path, a narrow maintenance passage, barely wide enough for 2 people. One by one, he led the survivors through the passage. The infected swarmed the main tunnel, unable to reach the narrow passage, but the sounds of their growls, screeches, and snarls followed relentlessly. Zohran was last, striking down any infected that managed to peek into the passage. His body ached, his lungs burned, his hands were slick with blood, his clothes shredded. But he moved because stopping meant death for himself and everyone behind him.
Finally, they reached a stairwell leading back to the streets above. When they emerged, the city was unrecognizable. Fires had spread further, smoke blanketing the skyline. Helicopters patrolled, but their signals were intermittent. Johran and the survivors moved quickly through the streets, avoiding open areas. They found temporary refuge in a partially intact office building. Inside, they collapsed, exhausted, shaking, but alive. Zohran looked at the group. 21 had entered the subway. Only 15 emerged. The cost was unimaginable, but the lesson was clear. Survival demanded every ounce of courage, every moment of focus, and every decision made without hesitation. Zohran sat against a wall, staring at the ceiling, listening to the moans and distant screams of the city. The subway had claimed many, but it had also taught him something crucial. New York was still alive. The infected were dangerous, intelligent, and relentless, but humanity, the stubborn, defiant heart of it, had not yet been extinguished. Dr. Ortiz approached him quietly. "Mayor, we need to regroup, resupply, and plan. The infection is learning. It's getting smarter. Next time, it may trap us completely." Zohran nodded. "Then we outsmart it, we adapt, and we fight. New York didn't survive wars, riots, and disasters to fall to the dead. Not now. Not on my watch." Outside, the city screamed. Inside, survivors clung to life, drawing strength from their leader. The subway had tested them, had almost destroyed them, but it had not yet broken them. And Johran Mmdani, mayor and reluctant soldier, knew the war for the city had only just begun.
The city above had become a graveyard, its skyline shattered and smoldering under a sun barely piercing the smoke. From their temporary refuge in the office building, Mayor Johran Mmdani and the survivors surveyed the streets through broken windows. Fires raged in the distance, and the occasional groan of the infected echoed from the alleys below. Zohran had survived the subway. He had led his group through unimaginable chaos, but a new threat awaited. Not from the streets, not from the shadows, but from within. Trust, he realized, could be as deadly as any bite. Morning brought no relief. The survivors huddled in the office, rationing water and checking weapons. Soldiers moved cautiously, eyes scanning every floor, every hallway. Civilians clutched their makeshift weapons, crowbars, knives, even broken pipes. Every heartbeat reminded them that danger lurked outside and perhaps inside. Johran called a meeting. "We need to plan our next move," he said, voice steady but heavy with authority. "We can't stay here. We need more supplies, more survivors, and a defensible location. But first, we need to make sure no one here is compromised." A soldier named Vargas, grizzled and silent, raised an eyebrow. "Compromised? What do you mean?" Johran looked around, making eye contact with each member of the group. "The infected are not the only threat. People who have been bitten, even slightly, or who hide injuries can turn on us. We've seen it before. We cannot afford mistakes." A murmur ran through the group. Fear began to mingle with distrust. They had survived the subway, fought off packs of the undead, and now they were being told someone among them might be a danger. Hours later, Johran noticed subtle signs: missing supplies, weapons misplaced, and suspicious movements among the survivors. One soldier, Daniels, kept disappearing during shifts on lookout. Another, a technician named Harrow, seemed unusually nervous, constantly checking doors and peering down hallways. Johran called Vargas aside. "Keep an eye on them. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but something's off." Vargas nodded silently, scanning the floors with a practiced eye.
Late that night, screams echoed from the stairwell. Johran grabbed a rifle and rushed out with a few soldiers. They found one of their civilians, a young woman named Lena, pinned against a wall by Daniels. His eyes were wild, frothing at the mouth, pale and cold, unmistakably bitten. Johran didn't hesitate. He fired, hitting Daniel squarely in the chest. He fell, twitching violently, then lay still. Lena sobbed, clutching him as if she could make him human again. This is what we were talking about," Johran said grimly. "We act fast, no hesitation, no mercy. Survival demands it." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Morality was a fragile luxury in this city now, and Johran's words, though necessary, left a bitter taste. The survivors were on edge. Every sound, every shadow, every stumble triggered suspicion. Dr. Selena Ortiz tried to maintain calm, tending to the injured, organizing supplies, and keeping track of everyone. But even she could not hide the tension that had taken hold. Johran called another meeting. "We have to trust each other, but trust is earned, not assumed. From now on, anyone moving alone must be accompanied. Anyone hiding injuries will be removed immediately. This isn't about punishment, it's about survival." Some nodded reluctantly. Others, quietly, clenched fists or muttered under their breath. Fear was turning into something sharper: resentment. 2 days later, the group prepared to move to a larger fortified warehouse reported safe by military reconnaissance. Supplies were packed, weapons checked, and the group formed a tight convoy. Johran led the way. Halfway through the journey, Harrow, the nervous technician, ran forward suddenly, blocking the path. In his hands a flare gun and a small canister. Before anyone could react, he fired. The flare hit the street below, sparking a fire that illuminated the approaching streets. From the shadows, the infected surged, hundreds, moving with frightening coordination. Harrow laughed maniacally as chaos erupted. Johran reacted instantly, tackling Harrow to the ground and smashing the flare gun out of his hand. Soldiers opened fire on the approaching infected while trying to subdue the traitor. Harrow fought back violently, biting one soldier before being restrained. Breathless, bloodied, and furious, Johran dragged Harrow to a safe corner. "Why?" he demanded.
Why do this? Harrow's eyes were wild. The world is ending. The infected. They are evolution. Humanity is weak. I want to see what survives.
Johran's stomach turned. The betrayal was complete. Someone not only jeopardizing the group's safety, but actively helping the infected.
The group was shaken, morale plummeted, but Johran could not let fear and betrayal paralyze them. He made a swift, brutal decision. Harrow had to be removed. The infected might claim him anyway, but leaving him free to act would risk everyone else's life. With the group watching, Johran ended the threat, a single, clean act that left no ambiguity. Silence followed. The only sound was the distant growl of a crouching infected, drawn by the flare. Johran turned to the survivors. This is the world now. We survive or we die. Nothing else matters. The convoy moved on, tighter, faster, more cautious than ever before. They had learned a hard lesson. Survival demanded ruthlessness, vigilance, and unity, even if it meant making decisions no human should have to make. The journey continued through abandoned avenues, where the city's devastation had created a surreal nightmare. Fires burned unchecked. Cars were overturned. The infected moved in packs, tearing into anything living. Johran led the survivors through narrow alleys, avoiding open streets. They moved in silence, communicating with hand signals and whispers. Every corner held potential death. Every shadow hid lurking predators. At one point, a pack of infected ambushed them from a collapsed building, forcing a brutal firefight. Soldiers fired relentlessly, civilians ducked, and Johran fought hand-to-hand with a creature that had lunged from the darkness. His crowbar connected with bone. The infected fell, twitching, but another took its place immediately. The group was exhausted, bloodied, and terrified, but they pressed on, knowing that stopping meant death.
By late evening, they reached the outskirts of a large warehouse, partially fortified and reported safe by other survivors. Johran and his team quickly assessed the building: strong walls, limited entry points, and room for all to rest. Inside, the survivors collapsed in exhaustion. Johran moved through the group, checking wounds, handing out water, and ensuring everyone was accounted for. The betrayal, the chaos, and the relentless attacks had taken a toll. But for the first time in days, the group had a moment of respite. Dr. Ortiz approached Johran quietly. "Mayor, this betrayal, it could happen again. We need stricter protocols or we'll lose more people." Johran nodded, exhaustion etched into his face. "We survive today. We learn, we adapt. Tomorrow, we fight smarter." Johran sat in a corner, alone for a moment, staring at the warehouse walls. The city above was still burning. The infected were still moving. Trust was fragile. Morality was a luxury. And yet, humanity had endured. The survivors had followed him through chaos, through fire, through betrayal. He clenched his fists, his mind racing with plans. This was no longer just survival. It was leadership under apocalypse. And every decision he made now would decide who lived, who died, and who could rebuild New York. Outside, the sounds of the city echoed. Distant sirens, collapsing buildings, the groans of the infected, and the occasional shout of survivors in despair or defiance. Johran knew that the betrayal within was only the beginning. The true war had just begun.
The city that had once been the heart of New York, Midtown Manhattan, now burned like a hellish furnace. Flames shot out of high-rise buildings, windows shattered from internal explosions, and streets that had once thrived with commerce were now rivers of fire, rubble, and death. The roar of the fires mixed with distant screams, gunfire, and the guttural growls of the infected, creating a symphony of chaos that shook the very soul. Mayor Johran Mmdani and the survivors had received reports from Dr. Selena Ortiz. A massive fire had erupted in Midtown, spreading rapidly through the streets, fueled by overturned vehicles, ruptured gas lines, and abandoned buildings. Worse, hundreds, possibly thousands of infected were moving toward the heart of the city, drawn by noise and movement. Zohran stared at the map projected on the wall of the warehouse, tracing the flames and paths of the infected with a trembling finger. The city center, the financial district, Times Square and the surrounding blocks was a death trap. He said, "We can't just sit here. If we do nothing, the fire will spread, the infected will multiply, and the city will be lost forever. We move, we fight, we survive." The survivors worked feverishly to prepare. Soldiers checked weapons and ammo. Civilians gathered supplies, first aid kits, water, food, and anything that could be used as a weapon. Dr. Ortiz tended to injuries from the subway escape, her hands steady, but face pale and exhausted. Zohran addressed the group. "We're going into Midtown. Our priority? Survivors. Evacuate anyone we can find. Protect each other. Every decision matters. Every step is life or death. This is the fight of our lives, and no one is left behind." The group nodded grimly. Fear was present, but determination burned brighter. They had survived betrayal, chaos, and the subway of the dead. Now they faced the inferno. The group moved toward Midtown under the cover of early morning haze. Streets were blocked with burning vehicles, rubble, and abandoned corpses. Smoke and ash choked the air, making it difficult to breathe. Every step was a gamble. The fire could spread unpredictably, and the infected could strike from anywhere. From the shadows of a collapsed building, the first infected lunged. Soldiers fired point-blank, but more poured from alleys and broken buildings. The group scattered, ducking behind vehicles and debris, returning fire whenever possible. The chaos was immediate, brutal, and relentless. Zohran fought his way through the front lines, crowbar and rifle at the ready. Every strike, every shot was a battle for survival. Civilians clung to him, trusting his instincts, while soldiers covered the flanks, struggling to maintain a defensive line in the midst of madness.
By midday, the group reached Times Square, a place that had once symbolized the city's energy and vibrancy. Now, the iconic screens flickered with static, the neon lights melting under the heat. Fires burned in the streets, smoke swirling in thick clouds. The infected moved through the square like a tide of death, tearing anything in their path. Zohran signaled a halt. "We can't fight them all here. We need a route through, a way to evacuate survivors." Dr. Ortiz spoke up. "There are civilians trapped in nearby buildings. If we can get to them, we might save dozens." Zohran nodded. "Then we split, soldiers with me. Civilians follow Dr. Ortiz to the nearest safe building. Move quickly, stay low, and watch each other's backs." As the soldiers and Zohran advanced, fires erupted on either side. A gas line blew near a corner, sending a wall of flame toward them. Zohran grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and pushed the civilians out of the way, shielding them from the blast. Debris fell from above, sparks igniting more fires, and the heat became unbearable. The infected didn't hesitate. They surged toward the survivors, undeterred by flames, faster than humans could react. Soldiers fired, but each round seemed to barely dent their momentum. Zohran swung this crowbar, striking a figure that lunged from behind a billboard. Blood sprayed across the asphalt, but before he could breathe, another attacked from the shadows. Amid the chaos, Zohran's mind raced. Every street they passed became a new battlefield. Civilians screamed, some frozen in terror, others moving with grim determination. Smoke burned their eyes, fire licked at their heels, and the infected pressed relentlessly. The group approached the West Side Highway, where fires had created a barrier across the road. There was no way around. The only option was through. Johran assessed the situation quickly. He shouted over the roar of the inferno, "We move together. No one lags behind. Cover each other. We run. We fight. We survive." They dashed across the burning highway, dodging collapsing structures and leaping over burning debris. The infected followed, relentless, snapping and biting at anything that moved. Johran's rifle cracked, hitting one as it lunged, but dozens more closed in. Halfway across, a soldier tripped, falling into the flames. Screams erupted. Zohran didn't hesitate. He lunged, pulling the soldier out, his own clothes catching fire. He stomped flames out, breathless, eyes burning from the smoke, but the group pressed on. Survival demanded sacrifice, courage, and ruthless determination.
Once across, Dr. Ortiz led the civilians into a partially intact office building where dozens of people had barricaded themselves. They were terrified, some injured, some frozen with shock. Zohran moved through the corridors, clearing the building of infected, coordinating soldiers and ensuring everyone was accounted for. He found a man pinned beneath rubble, barely conscious. With the help of 2 soldiers, Zohran lifted the debris and carried him out. The fire and smoke were everywhere, but he refused to stop. Every life mattered. Every survivor was a victory against the overwhelming chaos. As the group emerged from the building, Zohran looked out over Midtown. Fires had engulfed blocks, infected roamed freely, and the screams of the city's dying echoed across the skyline. Dr. Ortiz approached him, voice trembling. "Mayor, this isn't just a fire. It's spreading faster than we can control. If we don't find a way to contain it, the entire city will be lost." Zohran clenched his fists. "Then we fight smarter. We use what we have. We take what's ours. New York isn't going to die while I'm still standing." The survivors regrouped on the edge of the burning streets, exhausted, bloodied, but alive. They had crossed fire, chaos, and death itself. The city was a battlefield, and every step forward was a victory. That night, atop a partially collapsed building, Zohran looked out over the inferno of Midtown. Flames reflected in his eyes, illuminating the grit and determination etched into his face. The city was dying, but the human spirit endured. The infected were relentless, intelligent, and evolving, but so were they. He turned to the survivors huddled near him. "We've survived fire, betrayal, and the subway. Tomorrow we continue. We reclaim what's left, and no matter what, we survive. Together." Dr. Ortiz nodded. "Tomorrow, we plan. We strike back. We survive." The city burned below, the infected roamed unchecked, and the survivors clung to the mayor's resolve like a lifeline. The inferno was far from over, but Johran Mmdani knew one thing. New York's heart still beat, and as long as they fought, it would continue to beat. The skyline of New York was barely recognizable. Fires had consumed blocks, smoke and ash hung heavy over the city, and the moans of the infected echoed relentlessly through streets, alleys, and tunnels. Mayor Johran Mmdani stood on the edge of the warehouse rooftop, staring at the East River. Across the water lay Manhattan's financial district, partially intact but under siege by flames, chaos, and relentless undead swarms. Their temporary safe house had become a staging point. Supplies were low, numbers of survivors dwindling, and the threat of betrayal, and the infected, still very real. Zohran knew they had to move. The only viable escape route was the river, using whatever boats or barges could still float. Zohran gathered the survivors in the warehouse, speaking with calm authority over the hum of distant chaos outside. "We crossed the river at dawn," he said, pointing toward the East River. "We can't stay here. Supplies are running low and the infected are adapting. We'll split into teams, soldiers, civilians, and those who can carry supplies. Everyone stays together, everyone survives together.
No exceptions. Dr. Selena Ortiz checked her maps, tracing potential boat routes and abandoned docks. The bridges are blocked, the subway tunnels are impassable, and most ferries have been destroyed. This is the only safe crossing. Vargas, the grizzled soldier, spoke up. The river won't be quiet. There will be infected in the water, floating corpses, debris. If we're exposed, we'll lose people. Johran nodded. Then we move fast, stay low, and fight for every step. We survive or we drown trying. That's the choice. Before dawn, the group moved through the city's ruined streets. Smoke obscured visibility. Fires raged nearby, threatening to trap them. Each step was calculated. Every alley, every doorway, every shadow had the potential to hide death. A pack of infected ambushed them from a collapsed building. Soldiers fired, civilians screamed, and chaos erupted instantly. Johran swung a crowbar, striking one infected in the skull, and kicked another off a civilian. Blood and smoke mixed in a thick haze. Dr. Ortiz yelled instructions, guiding the civilians through safer routes. Keep moving. Don't stop. There's nothing safe until we reach the river. They pushed forward, dodging collapsing debris and fire. The sound of the river ahead was both a relief and a harbinger. It promised escape, but also a new set of dangers.
The survivors reached the East River docks just as the sun began to rise. Rusted ferries and abandoned boats floated aimlessly, some sinking, some blocked by debris. Zohran surveyed the situation. Split into teams. Get everyone aboard. Soldiers, secure the perimeter. Civilians, move fast, he instructed. No sooner had they begun than a loud roar echoed from the far end of the docks. A massive horde of infected, hundreds strong, moved toward them. The chaos that followed was immediate. The infected surged forward, breaking through barricades, smashing crates, and lunging at anyone in their path. Johran acted instinctively, rallying the soldiers and civilians. Form a line, cover each other, don't let them reach the boats. Gunfire erupted, echoing across the water. The infected attacked with relentless coordination, tearing through the dock structures. Civilians panicked, some frozen in fear. Zohran grabbed a struggling man, dragging him behind a barricade. As they loaded the first boats, an abandoned fuel barge nearby exploded, flames shooting across the docks. The heat singed their faces, smoke burned their eyes, and several survivors screamed as they were knocked off balance. Johran grabbed Dr. Ortiz and pulled her to safety behind a reinforced crate. We move through the next set of boats. Stay low. Fire spreads fast. The soldiers fired continuously, bullets pinging off metal and concrete. Some infected fell, but dozens more surged forward. The docks themselves were starting to collapse under the chaos. Every second was a life or death gamble. By mid-morning, the first group of boats began moving. The survivors paddled furiously, trying to escape the infected and fire. Water sprayed over the sides as debris floated alongside them. Grotesque corpses bobbed in the water, some thrashing as if still alive, their cold hands scraping against the sides of the boats. Johran stayed on the lead boat, scanning the water and riverbanks for threats. Keep rowing. Don't look back. Every second counts. Midway across the river, a massive infected creature, larger than any they had faced before, emerged from the water. Its eyes were white, its jaw gaping, and it charged at the lead boat. Johran fired repeatedly, missing it first before landing precise shots that sent it back into the river with a splash. The survivors gasped, hearts racing. The water was cold, the currents strong, and debris made navigation treacherous. Several survivors lost balance, splashing into the freezing river. Soldiers dove to save them,
dragging them back into the boats. Johran's arms ached from paddling, firing, and swinging his crowbar, but he refused to stop. Survival demanded endurance, courage, and focus.
As the boats neared the opposite bank, a shocking betrayal unfolded. One of the civilians, a man named Kane, tipped over a small boat carrying supplies and medical kits. "We don't survive together, only the strong," he shouted. The boat capsized, supplies thrown into the river. Some survivors screamed, struggling against the water. Johran reacted instantly, jumping into the freezing river to rescue a struggling child, dragging him to the next boat. Soldiers neutralized Kane, restraining him until the boats reached the far shore. Johran realized, again, that the city's greatest threats were not just the infected. Humans could be just as dangerous when desperation took hold. Finally, after hours of chaos, the survivors reached the far side of the East River. Exhausted, shivering, and bloodied, they clambered onto the bank. Fires and screams still echoed across the river, but for the first time in days, they were temporarily safe from immediate death. Dr. Ortiz immediately began tending to the injured, distributing supplies, and checking everyone for signs of infection. Johran walked along the line, ensuring no one was left behind. 17 boats had left the docks. Only 14 made it across with survivors. The cost of survival was painfully clear. Johran climbed a small hill overlooking the riverbank, surveying the chaos they had escaped. Midtown burned, the docks were a massacre, and yet the survivors had endured. He turned to Dr. Ortiz. "We've lost too many, but we're not done. The city is still alive. We still fight. Tomorrow we rebuild a foothold. We take the city back one block at a time." Dr. Ortiz nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Mayor, the river crossing shows something. The infected are intelligent, organized, and humans can betray just as easily. We need strategy, trust, and unity, or we'll lose everything." Johran clenched his fists. "Then we adapt, we survive, and New York will not fall as long as we stand together." The survivors huddled around him, shivering from cold, exhaustion, and fear, yet holding on to hope. Across the river, fires burned, and the city's moans continued, a reminder that the war for survival was far from over.
The sun rose over a city in ruin, though the light struggled to pierce through smoke, ash, and the ever-present haze of destruction. Manhattan, the beating heart of New York, was now a fortress of chaos. Fires burned unchecked, buildings teetered on collapse, and the groans of the infected echoed through every street, alley, and subway vent. Mayor Johran Mmdani surveyed the city from a partially collapsed high-rise, overlooking the survivors he had brought across the river. Their temporary refuge was on the western edge of the island, a reinforced office building that offered height, limited entry points, and defensible space. But Johran knew they could not stay passive. The infected were growing in number, evolving in aggression and coordination. Civilians were exhausted, supplies limited, and the city itself was a battlefield, one that would soon become a full-scale siege. Johran called a meeting in the warehouse's top floor. His team gathered around battered maps and scribbled plans. Soldiers checked weapons, civilians moved heavy furniture to block entrances, and Dr. Selena Ortiz organized first aid stations. "This is it," Johran began, voice steady, commanding attention. "We hold Manhattan. We survive. We fight back. The infected will come, and they will be relentless. But we have walls, we have strategy, and we have each other. Survival demands everything: focus, courage, and unity." Vargas, the seasoned soldier, pointed to a map. "They'll come from the east and south, the bridges, the tunnels, anything they can reach. We can't cover everything, but we can create choke points, funnel them into kill zones." Johran nodded. "Exactly. Soldiers take the perimeter. Civilians assist with barricades. Everyone else, stay ready, stay sharp. We don't just survive tonight. We make sure anyone who comes into Manhattan pays a price." By late afternoon, the infected began their approach. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, moved through streets, subways, and broken buildings, drawn by sound, movement, and instinct. The first wave hit the perimeter. Soldiers fired rifles, bullets tearing into the attacking horde. Crowbars, makeshift spears, and Molotov cocktails joined the fight. The air was thick with smoke, ash, and the ever-present haze of destruction. Civilians screamed, some fighting, others frozen in terror. Johran moved like a storm through the chaos, swinging a crowbar with precision, directing fire, and rescuing anyone trapped or overwhelmed. A civilian boy, terrified and cornered, cried out as an infected lunged. Johran struck it down, blood spraying across the wall. "Stay with me," he shouted, dragging the boy to safety. Reports from scouts confirmed the worst. Infected had breached an abandoned subway tunnel beneath the building. They were flooding the streets from below, moving with intelligence and coordination. Johran signaled Vargas, "We need countermeasures. Barricade the tunnels. Use everything we've got." Soldiers reinforced doors with metal beams, while civilians moved furniture and debris to create blockades. Fires were lit strategically, and sharp objects were set to impale any attackers. But the infected were persistent, and the tunnel breach unleashed a wave of chaos. Gunfire and screams echoed through the building as infected poured in. Johran fought side by side with the soldiers, striking down creature after creature. The floor beneath them shook as a portion of the building collapsed, sending dust and rubble into the room.
Amid the chaos, civilians panicked. Some tried to flee, others froze. A group was trapped on the 5th floor, smoke and fire cutting off their route. Johran and Vargas led a daring rescue, climbing through debris-filled stairwells, swinging crowbars, and dragging survivors to safety. Dr. Ortiz worked tirelessly to stabilize injuries. Her hands were streaked with blood, her face pale but determined. She treated a young woman whose leg had been crushed under falling debris, all while the building shook from another wave of attacks. Johran realized that every action, every decision could mean life or death. The siege wasn't just external, it was internal, moral, and psychological. Panic could destroy them as surely as the infected. By nightfall, the situation escalated. Fires spread through nearby streets, fueled by overturned vehicles, collapsing buildings, and ruptured gas lines. The infected moved through the inferno with terrifying resilience, their numbers seemingly infinite. Johran knew they could not hold the building indefinitely. The siege required decisive action, traps, counterattacks, and strategic retreats to lure the infected into controlled zones. He rallied the survivors. "Tonight, we fight smart. Use fire, barricades, everything at our disposal. We make them pay for every inch of this city. Survival isn't about running, it's about fighting back." The group set traps, fortified barricades, and prepared for a final, desperate confrontation. At midnight, the horde finally breached the outer barricades. The building shook from the impact, glass shattered, and smoke filled the air. Soldiers fired, civilians screamed, and the infected surged forward, relentless and coordinated. Johran fought at the front, striking, shooting, and coordinating defense. Every moment was chaos. Every second, lives were lost or saved by split-second decisions. A group of infected forced their way into the main hall. Johran swung his crowbar, striking one down, only to have another grab him by the arm.
He kicked, punched, and finally threw it against a wall, breaking its neck. Blood sprayed across the floor. Dr. Ortiz screamed as a young civilian was cornered. Johran dove, tackling the infected away, his body covered in blood and sweat. Survival demanded sacrifice, courage, and ruthlessness.
Zohran realized that passive defense would fail. They needed to take the fight to the infected. Soldiers prepared Molotov cocktails, firing them into the advancing horde. Crowbars, knives, and makeshift spears joined the attack. Civilians helped, throwing anything they could find to slow the onslaught. The building became a battlefield of fire, blood, and chaos. Infected fell, rose, and fell again. Every inch gained was a victory. Every misstep could be fatal. Zohran, exhausted but relentless, moved through the chaos, rescuing civilians, directing soldiers, and striking down the infected. The survivors drew strength from his resolve, fighting with renewed determination. By dawn, the siege had ebbed. The infected had been repelled, for now. The building was battered, smoke still filled the hallways, and the survivors were bloodied, exhausted, and shaken. Zohran stood amidst the wreckage, surveying the aftermath. "We survived the siege," he said, voice hoarse. "But the fight isn't over. Manhattan is still alive, but the city won't wait for us to recover. We adapt, we prepare, and we continue. We survive. Together." Dr. Ortiz nodded, checking the wounded. "Mayor, the siege shows us something crucial. The infected are relentless, organized, and learning. But humans can adapt just as fast. We've survived tonight because of strategy, courage, and unity. Tomorrow, we build on that." Zohran looked out over the burning skyline. The siege of Manhattan had tested them all, physically, mentally, and morally. But they had endured.
The morning fog hung heavy over Manhattan, a gray shroud that obscured the devastation below. Fires still smoldered in the streets, smoke spiraled from collapsed buildings, and the moans of the infected echoed across the cityscape like a dirge for the living. The survivors, fewer in number but hardened by weeks of horror, gathered at the makeshift headquarters Zohran had secured. Johran Mmdani stood on a rooftop, surveying the river and the skyline beyond. The East and Hudson rivers surrounded the island like natural barriers, but they were also traps. The bridges were destroyed or overrun. Any attempt to escape had to be swift, coordinated, and ruthless. Survival demanded nothing less. Zohran convened the remaining soldiers, civilians, and medical staff. "The city is falling apart," he said, voice cutting through the morning haze. "Fire, infected, chaos, it's spreading. We cannot hold Manhattan forever. Our only option, escape the island. Boats, barges, anything that floats. We move as one." Dr. Selena Ortiz spread a map across a metal table, pointing to several potential evacuation points. Most docks are compromised. The best route is along the northern riverfront, fewer infected, and the barges we've scouted are intact. But it's a narrow path and will be exposed to attacks from all directions. Vargas, battle-worn but alert, added, "We'll need to split into teams, lead group on boats, rear guard covering the civilians and supplies. Timing is everything. One misstep and the river becomes a trap instead of an escape." Zohran's eyes scanned the group, locking onto each survivor. "We've survived fire, betrayal, and the siege. This is the final test before whatever comes next. Stay close, watch each other. We get off this island together." The survivors moved cautiously through the ruined streets, ducking under smoldering signs and past crumbling buildings. Fires flared unpredictably, and the distant moans of the infected warned them that danger was never far. Suddenly, a collapsed building above a narrow alleyway groaned, and rubble fell in a cascade, blocking their path. A group of infected surged from the shadows, attracted by the noise. Zohran acted instantly. He swung his crowbar, striking down the first attacker, then pulled a civilian to safety as bullets tore through the debris. Soldiers opened fire, covering the retreat. Civilians scrambled, slipping in ash and debris. The chaos was immediate and unrelenting. One of the survivors, a teenager named Max, froze in terror as an infected lunged. Zohran didn't hesitate. He grabbed Max, shoved him behind a fallen vehicle, and struck the infected with a resounding blow. Max's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, understanding that survival required courage and split-second decisions.
By midday, the group reached the northern riverfront. Rusted ferries and barges floated precariously, some listing dangerously. The water was dark, littered with debris and floating corpses. Johran surveyed the scene. "Load quickly, no hesitation," he shouted. "Soldiers, cover the perimeter. Civilians, move fast. We don't get a second chance." As they began loading, a loud rumble echoed through the docks. From the streets, hundreds of infected poured toward them, drawn by movement and noise. Fire erupted from nearby overturned vehicles, sending sparks across the water. Johran fired his rifle, taking down one infected after another, while soldiers used Molotovs and barricades to delay the horde. Civilians screamed, some falling into the river, struggling against the current. Johran dove in, dragging a struggling child aboard the closest barge. The water was freezing, debris cutting their skin, but survival demanded immediate action. As the boats pulled away, infected swarmed the docks, some jumping into the water, thrashing and trying to climb aboard. Johran coordinated soldiers and survivors, keeping the panic at bay. One barge began to tilt dangerously as Max, panicked, lost his balance and fell overboard. A soldier lunged, saving him just in time. Johran grabbed the hand of another civilian, pulling her aboard as infected grabbed at the sides. The river became a chaotic battlefield of water, fire, and blood. Debris and floating corpses blocked paths, forcing the boats into narrow channels. The water surged, currents threatening to overturn them. Yet despite the chaos, the survivors pressed forward, adrenaline and sheer willpower keeping them alive. Midway across the river, a massive infected creature, larger and more ferocious than any before, surged from the water, heading straight for the lead barge. Johran fired repeatedly, but it was fast, agile, and powerful. Vargas, seeing the threat, made a split-second decision. "Go, I'll hold it off," he shouted. He leaped onto a smaller barge, drawing the creature's attention, buying precious minutes for the others. Johran wanted to stay, to fight alongside Vargas, but he realized the priority, survival for the group. "Go," he shouted, as the lead barge pulled ahead, leaving Vargas engaged in a deadly struggle with the creature. The group, hearts pounding, pushed forward, the sounds of gunfire and the infected's roars fading behind them. They had survived, but at a cost.
As they neared the opposite riverbank, chaos erupted again. Debris blocked the dock, making docking perilous. Flames from the shoreline spread unpredictably, and infected scrambled from broken streets to the water's edge, trying to halt their escape. Johran coordinated the landings, giving precise instructions over the comms. Soldiers threw ropes, helping civilians climb aboard safely. Dr. Ortiz pulled a teenager from the water, shivering but alive. The final moments of the river crossing were a test of coordination, courage, and split-second decision-making. One misstep could mean death by water, infected, or fire. At last, the surviving boats reached the far shore. Survivors clambered onto solid ground, collapsing from exhaustion, cold, and trauma. Dr. Ortiz immediately began treating injuries, while soldiers secured the perimeter. Johran, however, was nowhere to be found. During the final surge toward the dock, he had disappeared amid a tangle and debris, fighting infected and ensuring every civilian made it safely. His absence was noted immediately. Panic surged among the survivors. "We have to go back," shouted one soldier. Dr. Ortiz shook her head. "No, we don't know if he's alive or what's out there. We can't risk everyone else. He's strong. He survived worse than this. He'll find a way." The survivors realized that Zohran's disappearance was not necessarily death. He might be trapped, fighting, or still alive somewhere. But for now, the priority was survival. As night fell, the survivors set up a temporary camp on the far shore. Fires were lit for warmth and signaling. They were battered, weary, and traumatized, yet alive. The river crossing had been a test of courage, coordination, and sacrifice, and they had endured. Dr. Ortiz spoke quietly to the group. "Mayor Mmdani, he's not dead, not yet. If anyone can survive and fight his way back to us, it's him. We keep hope alive, and we stay together. That's the only way." The survivors nodded, holding on to the thought of their missing leader as a beacon of hope. Across the river, Manhattan still burned, chaos still reigned, and the infected were still countless. But for the first time in days, there was a sense of fragile hope, that survival was possible, and that Johran Mmdani, the mayor and fighter, was still out there.
The city was a war zone unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Manhattan's skyline was jagged and crumbling. Smoke and ash choked the streets. Fires raged uncontrollably, and the moans of the infected echoed in every alley, every subway tunnel, every shattered building. Mayor Johran Mmdani had disappeared during the river crossing. His absence weighed heavily on the survivors who had made it across, but they clung to hope, knowing that he was resourceful, relentless, and alive. Now, standing on the far shore of Manhattan, the group faced their final challenge. They could not remain stranded. Supplies were low, the infected were still abundant, and the city, though devastated, needed to be reclaimed. One street, one block, one heartbeat at a time. Dr. Selena Ortiz addressed the survivors, her voice firm yet compassionate. "We've survived fire, betrayal, siege, and the river. Now we face our final test. We fight together, we protect each other, and we survive." Mayor Mmdani taught us that leadership isn't just about orders, it's about courage, unity, and hope. We carry that forward. The survivors nodded. Their numbers were fewer than before, but their resolve had hardened like steel. Every scar, every loss, every fear had forged them into something stronger. Vargas, battle-worn but unwavering, added, "This is our last stand on this island. No compromises, no hesitation. We fight or we die trying." By midday, the survivors began moving back toward Manhattan, using abandoned streets, rooftops, and partially intact buildings as cover. Fires burned nearby, and the distant groans of the infected reminded them that danger was omnipresent. Suddenly, a massive horde surged from a broken bridge, faster and larger than any they had faced. The survivors opened fire. Soldiers' rifles cracked, bullets tearing into the advancing infected. Civilians used improvised weapons, crowbars, axes, even flaming debris to hold them back. Zohran, though missing, was on everyone's mind. "We fight as if he were here," whispered Dr. Ortiz, "because he would fight with us, because he would want us alive." The chaos was immediate and overwhelming. Every corner held a threat. Every shadow could conceal death. Buildings shook from collapsing debris. Smoke burned their eyes. Ash coated their clothes. And blood, their own and the infected's, stained the streets.
Zohran had taught them well. Using barricades, fires, and narrow alleys, the survivors funneled the infected into kill zones. Molotov cocktails, gunfire, and improvised traps tore through the advancing horde. At one point, A large infected broke through a barricade, lunging at a young woman. Dr. Ortiz shoved her aside and struck the creature with a metal pipe, sending it crashing into a pile of debris. Vargas covered a group of civilians, his rifle echoing with every shot. "Stay together. Don't split up," he shouted. Even in chaos, the survivors adapted. Every wave was met with strategy, courage, and teamwork. They had learned, through fire, betrayal, siege, and river, that survival required not just strength, but brains and unity. As the day wore on, fires spread further, turning streets into rivers of flames. Yet the survivors pressed forward, moving with grim determination. Dr. Ortiz noticed movement on a nearby rooftop, a figure fighting the infected with extraordinary skill. Could it be? She squinted through the smoke, heart racing. No, too far, too fast to be certain. But something about the figure's stance, the efficiency of every movement, reminded her of Johran. Hope flared within her chest, fragile but unyielding. "Keep moving to the group. Survive. Fight. There's still hope." By evening, the survivors had reached a relatively intact section of the city, a high-rise they could defend. The horde was closing in, more aggressive than ever, pushing with sheer numbers and intelligence. Johran's presence was still absent, but the survivors acted as if he were there, every decision influenced by the lessons he had taught them. They fortified the building, set traps, and prepared for the ultimate confrontation. The horde attacked with overwhelming force. Gunfire, explosions, and cries of survivors filled the air. Flames erupted on the streets below, and ash rained down from the sky. It was chaos incarnate. In the midst of it, Dr. Ortiz saw flashes of movement, too precise, too coordinated, on distant rooftops. For a fleeting moment, she caught a glimpse of Johran, moving through the infected like a shadow, then disappearing into the smoke. Her heart leapt. He was alive. He had survived. The survivors fought tirelessly, defending the building and buying time for civilians to evacuate to safer positions. Some fell. Some were injured. Every inch of progress cost blood, sweat, and tears. Vargas shouted, "Hold the line! For those who can't fight! For those we've lost!" Dr. Ortiz rallied the remaining civilians. "We survive! We survive because we refuse to give up!" Flames threatened to engulf the building. Smoke choked their lungs, and the infected relentlessly pressed forward. And yet, through chaos, strategy, and courage, the survivors endured. As night fell, the battle reached a lull. The surviving group huddled within the fortified building, exhausted but alive. Dr. Ortiz's gaze drifted toward the horizon, across the city and the smoke-filled sky. A shadow moved among the fires, too quick, too controlled to be just another survivor. Could it be Zohran? She could not tell. But she knew this. He was out there, fighting, surviving, and perhaps watching over them. Hope remained. That small, stubborn belief that the mayor was still alive, that survival was possible, and that New York could rise again. The camera of imagination pans across the city. Fires burn, smoke twists into the sky. The infected moan and move relentlessly, and survivors cling to life in fortified pockets. Dr. Ortiz turns to the group. "We've survived every nightmare, every wave, every betrayal. Tomorrow, we fight again, and one day, we will see him again." The city is not safe. The apocalypse continues. But hope remains, and somewhere in the ruins, Johran Mmdani survives. Missing, unseen, but not dead, not zombified, and still a symbol of resilience. The story ends without closure, leaving the city, the survivors, and Zohran's fate open to the imagination. A final note of tension, hope, and endless possibility.